My name is Allison, and I am 32 years old. I am sitting in a lawyer's office right now watching the door swing open, and the woman walking through it is someone I have not seen in 16 years. My mother. She does not look at me with regret or shame. No, her eyes go straight to the folder on the table, the one containing my Uncle Harold's will. I still remember the night she left me a crumpled note on the kitchen table, her car pulling away in the darkness. Now she is back, and I know exactly why. Before I begin this story, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe if you have not already. Because this story is going to show you that sometimes the people who abandon you are the very first ones to come running back when there is money involved. I grew up in a small town called Cedar Falls, Iowa. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the biggest excitement of the week was the Friday night football game, and where dreams felt like something that happened to other people in bigger cities far away. Our family was simple. My father worked as a mechanic at the only auto repair shop in town. His hands were always stained with grease and he smelled like motor oil and coffee, but he had the kindest heart of anyone I have ever known. My mother, Diane, worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. She smiled at customers and made small talk about the weather, but at home, that smile rarely appeared. We lived in a small one-story house with white paint that was peeling off the wooden siding. The roof leaked when it rained hard, and the heating system rattled and groaned through every winter. But there was a big oak tree in the front yard, and I would spend hours sitting beneath it with a book in my lap, escaping into worlds far away from Cedar Falls. That tree felt more like home to me than the house ever did. My father was a quiet man. He did not say much, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. Every Saturday morning, he would wake me up early and take me fishing at Miller's Creek about 10 miles outside of town. We would sit there for hours, barely catching anything, but it did not matter. Those mornings were about being together, about the comfortable silence between a father and his daughter. He taught me how to bait a hook, how to be patient, how to appreciate the small moments. I did not realize then how precious those memories would become. My mother was different. She always seemed restless, like she was waiting for something better that never arrived. She complained constantly about money, about the house, about the town. She would look at our neighbors' new cars and sigh loudly. She would flip through magazines showing beautiful homes and say things like, "Why can't we have nice things like this?" My father would just nod and go back to his newspaper, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He worked so hard, and it was never enough for her. The one person who brought excitement into our lives was my Uncle Harold. He was my father's younger brother, but their lives could not have been more different. Harold had left Cedar Falls right after high school, moved to Chicago, and started a company that did something with computers and security. I did not understand it when I was young, but I knew he was successful. He drove a nice car, wore expensive watches, and lived in a place called a penthouse, which sounded like a castle to my young ears. Uncle Harold visited us a few times a year, usually around holidays. He would pull up in his shiny rental car, and I would run out to greet him before he even turned off the engine. He always brought gifts. Not just any gifts, but thoughtful ones. Books he thought I would enjoy, puzzles that challenged my mind, and once a telescope so I could look at the stars. He paid attention to who I was, not just who he thought I should be. I noticed early on that my mother acted differently when Harold was around. Her voice became sweeter, her laughter more frequent. She would touch her hair constantly and compliment everything about him. His jacket, his watch, the way he spoke. She would make comments that made me uncomfortable, even as a child. Things like, "Harold, you are so successful and still single. You should share some of that good fortune with family." My father would shift uncomfortably in his chair, but he never said anything. Harold would just smile politely and change the subject. One Christmas, when I was 12 years old, Harold gave me a laptop computer. It was the most expensive thing I had ever owned. I remember unwrapping it, my hands trembling with excitement, hardly believing it was real. Harold knelt down beside me and said, "Allison, you are a smart girl. I can see it in your eyes. This world is changing fast, and technology is going to be at the center of everything. I want you to have every opportunity to learn and grow." I hugged him so tight that day, and I meant every ounce of gratitude in that embrace. My mother's reaction was different. She stared at the laptop with obvious envy. Later that evening, I overheard her in the kitchen talking to Harold. She said, "That is a very generous gift for a child. I hope you are planning something equally generous for the adults in this family." Harold's response was calm but firm. He said, "Allison is my only niece. She is the future of this family. I want to invest in her potential." My mother did not have a reply to that. Those phone calls every Sunday evening became the highlight of my week. Harold would call at exactly 6 o'clock, and we would talk for at least 30 minutes. He asked about school, about my friends, about what I was reading. He encouraged me to think big, to not let Cedar Falls define the limits of my dreams. He told me stories about Chicago, about the people he worked with, about the challenges of building something from nothing. I hung on every word. As I got older, I started to understand that Harold saw something in me that my own mother did not. Or maybe she saw it too, but resented it. Either way, he became my anchor, my proof that there was more to life than what I saw around me every day. He made me believe that I could be somebody, that I could build a life worth living. But everything changed when I was 14 years old. My father started coughing more than usual. At first, he brushed it off as a cold that would not go away. Then the coughing became constant, and he started losing weight. My mother nagged him to see a doctor, though I suspect her concern was more about the medical bills than his health. When he finally went, the news was devastating. Stage 3 lung cancer. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, because that is exactly what they were. The 18 months that followed my father's diagnosis were the darkest of my young life. I watched the strongest man I knew become weaker with each passing day. The chemotherapy stole his energy, his appetite, his hair, but it never stole his spirit. Even when he could barely get out of bed, he would ask me about school, about my day, about my hopes for the future. He wanted to make sure I was okay, even when he clearly was not. My mother handled the situation poorly. Instead of stepping up, she started stepping out. She would leave the house in the evenings claiming she needed fresh air or had to run errands. The errands stretched from 30 minutes to several hours. I was left to care for my father, to heat up soup he could barely eat, to help him to the bathroom when he was too weak to walk alone. I was 15 years old, and I was becoming a caretaker. Uncle Harold sent money every month to help with the medical bills. He offered multiple times to fly my father to Chicago to get him into a better hospital with more advanced treatments. Each time my mother refused. She said she did not want to uproot our lives, that the local hospital was good enough. But I knew the real reason. She did not want to leave Cedar Falls because she did not want to leave Greg. Greg Morrison was the manager of the building supply store on the edge of town. He was 10 years older than my mother, divorced with a beer belly and a loud laugh. I first noticed something strange when my mother started wearing perfume to go grocery shopping. Then she got a new haircut. Then she started smiling at her phone in a way she never smiled at my father. One night when I was supposed to be asleep, I crept downstairs to get some water. My mother had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and it lit up with a message. I should not have looked, I know that, but something made me pick it up. The message was from Greg. It said, "I miss you already. Tonight was amazing." My stomach dropped. I set the phone back down exactly where I found it, went back to my room, and did not sleep for the rest of the night. I never told my father. How could I? He was fighting for his life, and I was terrified that this news would destroy whatever fight he had left. So I carried the secret alone, a weight too heavy for a 15-year-old to bear. I started to hate my mother, not just for what she was doing, but for making me complicit in her betrayal through my silence. My father passed away on a Tuesday in March, 2 weeks after my 16th birthday. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. My mother was not there. She had gone out for groceries, she said. The hospice nurse looked at me with pity and asked if I needed her to call someone. I shook my head. I just sat there holding my father's hand, which was still warm but would never squeeze mine again. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, some of my father's coworkers from the auto shop, and Uncle Harold, who flew in from Chicago the moment he heard the news. He held me while I cried, and his expensive suit got soaked with my tears. My mother stood at the edge of the gathering, dry-eyed, checking her phone. I remember thinking that she was probably texting Greg. 2 weeks after we buried my father, my mother came downstairs with a suitcase. She did not look at me as she set it by the front door. She said she needed some time to herself, that she was going away for a few days to clear her head. I asked her where she was going. She said it did not matter. I asked her when she would be back. She did not answer. After she walked out, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was written on the back of an old grocery receipt, as if I was not even worth a proper piece of paper. The note said, "I cannot do this anymore. You are old enough to take care of yourself. Good luck." There was no signature, no "I love you," no forwarding address. I called her phone. The number was disconnected. I tried again and again, thinking there must be some mistake. But there was no mistake. My mother had left me just like she left my dying father every night to be with her lover. Only this time she was not coming back. I sat at that kitchen table until the sun went down. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat there reading that note over and over, trying to understand how the woman who gave birth to me could throw me away like I was nothing. When it got dark, I finally picked up the phone and called the only person I had left in the world. Uncle Harold answered on the second ring. Harold was on a plane to Iowa before midnight. He arrived at the house by early morning, and the moment he walked through the door, I finally broke down. All the tears I had been holding back came flooding out. He held me for what felt like hours, not saying much, just letting me cry. When I finally calmed down, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You are coming with me. You are never going to be alone again. I promise you that." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and legal proceedings. Harold filed for emergency guardianship citing abandonment. The court approved it quickly. Once it was clear my mother had vanished, without leaving any contact information or provisions for my care. Harold sold the house in Cedar Falls. I did not want to keep it. There were too many bad memories soaked into those walls. The money from the sale went into a savings account with my name on it. Harold insisted on that. Moving to Chicago felt like entering another universe. Harold's penthouse was in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood filled with beautiful brownstones, tree-lined streets, and people who looked like they belonged in magazines. The building had a doorman who called me Miss Allison from day one. The elevator played soft jazz music, and the apartment itself had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. I had never seen so much water in my life. My room was bigger than the entire living room back in Iowa. Harold had already decorated it before I arrived with bookshelves along one wall, a desk with a brand new computer, and a window seat where I could curl up and read while watching the city lights twinkle below. He said he wanted me to feel at home. I did not tell him that I had not felt at home anywhere in years. Harold was honest with me from the beginning about his limitations. He sat me down the first night and said, "Allison, I do not know how to be a parent. I have never done this before, but I love you, and I am going to figure it out as we go. I want you to tell me when I mess up, because I probably will. And I want you to know that no matter what, I am here. I am not going anywhere." Those words meant more to me than he could possibly know. He enrolled me in a private school called Lakewood Academy. The tuition was more than my father had made in a year. The other students wore designer clothes and talked about summer homes in the Hamptons. I showed up with my Iowa accent and my secondhand jeans, and I was terrified that I would never fit in. But Harold hired tutors to help me catch up academically, and slowly I started to find my footing. The nightmares were the hardest part. I would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, dreaming that my mother was leaving again. Sometimes I dreamed that I was back in Cedar Falls alone in that empty house, and nobody was coming to save me. Harold heard me crying one night and came to check on me. He sat on the edge of my bed and said those dreams are going to come for a while. Maybe a long while, but every morning you wake up, I will be here. And eventually the dreams will lose their power. He found me a therapist named Dr. Patricia Howell, a kind woman with silver hair and warm eyes who specialized in adolescent trauma. I resisted at first. I did not want to talk about my feelings to a stranger. But Dr. Howell was patient, and over time she helped me understand that my mother's abandonment was not my fault. She said sometimes people make terrible choices, and those choices say everything about them and nothing about you. Your mother left because of her own brokenness, not because of anything you did or did not do. The thing about Harold was that he never tried to replace my parents. He did not ask me to call him dad or pretend that our situation was normal. He was just Harold, my uncle, my guardian, my friend. We developed our own routines. Sunday brunch at a diner near the lake. Wednesday nights watching old movies on his massive television. Saturday afternoons walking through the city, exploring different neighborhoods, eating food from every culture imaginable. He talked to me about his work, about the company he had built from nothing. TechShield Security, it was called. They created software that protected businesses from hackers and cyber attacks. He explained it to me in terms I could understand, and I found myself fascinated. He let me visit the office sometimes, and I would watch the programmers typing away at their computers, creating invisible shields that protected people all over the world. It felt like magic. By the time I graduated from high school, I was a different person than the broken 16-year-old who had arrived in Chicago 2 years earlier. I graduated with honors, gave a speech at the ceremony, and earned a full scholarship to MIT for computer science. Harold sat in the front row, and when I looked out at the audience, I saw tears streaming down his face. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. After the ceremony, he hugged me and said, "Your father would be so proud of you. I am so proud of you. You have overcome things that would have destroyed most people, and you have turned yourself into someone extraordinary." I cried too, right there in my cap and gown, surrounded by strangers. But they did not feel like strangers anymore. Chicago had become home, and Harold had become the family I thought I had lost forever. In all those years, my mother never reached out. Not once. No birthday cards, no phone calls, no emails. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment she drove away from Cedar Falls. I used to search for her online sometimes late at night when the curiosity became unbearable. I found her eventually. She had married Greg, moved to Texas, and had 2 sons, twin boys named Marcus and Derek. She posted pictures of them on social media, smiling in matching outfits, blowing out birthday candles, opening Christmas presents. She looked happy. She had built an entire new life, and I was not part of it. I showed Harold one of the pictures once. He looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then he closed the laptop and said, "She does not deserve any more of your time or energy. You have a future to build. Focus on that." I never looked at her social media again. MIT was everything I had dreamed of, and more. The campus was filled with people who were brilliant in ways I could barely comprehend, people who saw the world differently and wanted to change it. I dove into my studies with an intensity that surprised even my professors. Computer science felt like a language I had been born to speak. The logic, the problem solving, the creativity required to build something out of nothing. It all made sense to me in a way that nothing else ever had. Harold visited every month without fail. He would fly up from Chicago on a Friday evening, take me out to dinner somewhere nice, and spend the weekend catching up. We talked about everything: my classes, my friends, my fears, my dreams. He told me about the challenges at TechShield, the new contracts, the employees who impressed him, the ones who disappointed him. He treated me like an equal, like someone whose opinion mattered. During my junior year, Harold offered me a summer internship at TechShield. I accepted immediately, eager to learn the business from the inside. But when he suggested I start as a junior analyst, I pushed back. I told him I wanted to be a regular intern, working alongside the other college students, earning my position through merit. He smiled when I said that. He told me, "You remind me of myself when I was your age. Stubborn and proud. It is going to serve you well." That summer was transformative. I worked 12-hour days, learned more than I had in 3 years of coursework, and earned the respect of my colleagues through sheer effort. By the end of August, the internship coordinator told Harold that I was one of the best interns they had ever had. Harold just nodded and said, "I know." But I did not hire her because she is my niece. I hired her because she is exceptional. After graduation, I joined TechShield full-time as a software engineer. Again, I refused any special treatment. I wanted to prove myself on my own terms, to know that whatever I achieved was because of my abilities, not my relationship to the CEO. The first year was brutal. Long hours, demanding projects, colleagues who tested my patience. But I thrived under pressure. I always had. Over the next 5 years, I rose through the ranks. I led a team that developed a new security protocol that became the company's flagship product. I negotiated partnerships with major tech firms. I presented at industry conferences. And through it all, Harold was there, guiding me, challenging me, believing in me. Our relationship deepened in those years. We were no longer just uncle and niece, or even guardian and ward. We were partners, colleagues, friends. Harold started confiding in me about things he had never shared before. His regrets about never marrying, never having children of his own. The loneliness he had felt for years before I came into his life. He told me once, "You saved me just as much as I saved you. Before you arrived, I was just a man making money. You gave me a purpose." The first sign that something was wrong came when I was 28. Harold started getting winded easily, needing to rest after climbing a single flight of stairs. I noticed he was taking more pills than usual. When I asked him about it, he brushed off my concerns. "Just getting older," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But I did worry. I worried constantly. It took 6 months of persistence before he finally told me the truth. His heart was failing, a congenital condition that had run in his family for generations. His father had died of it at 55. Harold was now 57. He had known about the risk for years, but had ignored it, too focused on work to take care of himself. I immediately took charge. I researched the best cardiologists in the country, flew specialists to Chicago for consultations, hired a team of nurses to monitor him around the clock. Harold protested. At first said I was overreacting, that he was fine. But I would not listen. I had already lost my father to illness. I was not going to lose Harold too. The treatments helped. The specialists were optimistic. Harold stabilized and even improved. He cut back his hours at work, started eating better, took walks along the lakefront like the doctors recommended. For 4 years, we lived in a kind of delicate balance. The threat was always there, lurking beneath the surface, but we kept it at bay through vigilance and care. During that time, Harold asked me once if I wanted to reconnect with my mother. He said, "I am not going to be around forever, Allison. I want to make sure you have family when I am gone." I told him no. She made her choice 16 years ago. She chose to leave. She chose to start a new family without me. I do not owe her anything, and I certainly do not need her. Harold nodded. He never brought it up again. The end came more suddenly than I expected. Harold had a good day. A great day, actually. We had lunch together at his favorite restaurant, talked about the company's future, laughed about old memories. He told me he was proud of the woman I had become. That night, he went to sleep and never woke up. The nurse found him in the morning, peaceful, with a slight smile on his face. The doctor said his heart had simply stopped, that there was no pain. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. I held his hand one last time, cold now, and I thanked him for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for being the father I needed when my own father was taken too soon. I was 32 years old, and I was alone again. The weeks following Harold's death passed in a haze of grief and logistics. There was the funeral to arrange a large affair attended by hundreds of business associates, employees, and city officials. There were media inquiries to handle, as Harold had been a prominent figure in the tech industry. There were condolence cards piling up by the dozens many from people I had never heard of. I moved through it all on autopilot, smiling when required, shaking hands, accepting sympathies. But inside, I was drowning. The penthouse that had become my home felt empty without Harold's presence. His chair at the breakfast table, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his coffee mug still in the sink unwashed because the nurse had been too busy with the emergency to clean up from breakfast. I could not bring myself to wash it for weeks. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Richard Brennan, Harold's attorney. He asked me to come to his office for the reading of the will. I told him I was not interested in the money, that I just wanted to grieve in peace. He gently insisted, saying there were matters that required my presence, things Harold had specified in his final documents. So, I agreed. When I arrived at the law firm, a receptionist led me down a long hallway to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany table that could seat 20 people. She opened the door for me, and I stepped inside, expecting to see lawyers and paperwork. Instead, I saw her. Diane was seated at the far end of the table, looking older than I remembered, but instantly recognizable. Her hair was dyed a harsh shade of blonde, and she wore too much makeup, as if trying to cover up the years. Next to her sat a heavyset man with thinning hair and a cheap suit that strained against his gut. Greg. I recognized him from the one time I had glimpsed him in Cedar Falls all those years ago. And beside them were two teenage boys, gangly and awkward, looking around the room with undisguised curiosity. Marcus and Derek, my half-brothers, children I had never met. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Diane stood up, her face arranging itself into an expression of motherly concern that made my stomach turn. "Allison," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "My daughter, I have missed you so much." I did not respond. I walked past her without a word and took a seat on the opposite side of the table, as far from her as physically possible. The teenage boys stared at me openly. I wondered what Diane had told them about me, if she had told them anything at all. Greg cleared his throat and extended his hand across the table. "Allison," he said, "good to finally meet you properly. I am Greg, your mother's husband. We are family now." I looked at his hand, but did not take it. He withdrew it slowly, his face reddening. Richard Brennan entered the room, then followed by an associate carrying folders and documents. He greeted me warmly, offering condolences again, before taking his seat at the head of the table. He opened a folder and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Harold James Mitchell." He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Mitchell's estate is valued at approximately $23 million, including equity in TechShield Security Real Estate Holdings investment portfolios and liquid assets." I heard Greg inhale sharply. 23 million. The number hung in the air like something tangible. Brennan continued reading through the legal language, the specific bequests to various charities the trust fund established for employee scholarships. And then he got to the section that everyone was waiting for. "To my niece Allison Mitchell, whom I have raised as my own daughter, and who has been the greatest joy of my life, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including my ownership stake in TechShield Security, my real estate holdings, and all liquid assets, not otherwise designated. It is my wish that Allison continue to lead the company I built and carry forward the values we shared." Diane's face had gone pale. Greg was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. The boys looked confused, sensing the tension but not understanding it. Brennan paused, then continued. "To Diane Morrison, formerly Diane Mitchell, I leave the sum of $50,000. This bequest is made out of respect for my late brother, her first husband, and represents my final obligation to the past. Accompanying this bequest is a letter which I have been instructed to read aloud upon Mrs. Morrison's request. Diane's composure cracked. 50,000, she spat, out of 23 million. That is all. Brennan remained calm. Mrs. Morrison, this is what Mr. Mitchell specified in his will. The document was prepared 3 years ago and has not been amended since. Read the letter, Diane demanded. I want to hear what he had to say for himself. Brennan nodded and withdrew an envelope from the folder. He opened it carefully and began to read. Dear Diane, I have thought long and hard about what to say to you in this letter. You were married to my brother, the best man I ever knew, and for that reason alone, I will always feel a connection to you. But connection is not the same as obligation, and obligation is not the same as forgiveness. Brennan's voice was steady, almost gentle, as he continued. 16 years ago, you abandoned your daughter. You left her alone in an empty house, grieving her father with nothing but a note telling her to take care of herself. She was 16 years old, Diane. 16. And you threw her away like she meant nothing. I watched my mother's face as the words washed over her. Her jaw was tight, her eyes glistening. I took Allison in because she is family, because she deserved someone who would not give up on her. Over the years, I have watched her grow into a remarkable woman, despite everything you put her through. She is kind, brilliant, hardworking, and strong. Everything good in her exists not because of you, but in spite of you. Brennan paused to turn the page. I am leaving you $50,000 because it is enough to remind you of what you lost. Not the money you were hoping for, but the daughter you threw away. Money cannot buy back 16 years. It cannot buy forgiveness. And it certainly cannot buy you a place in Allison's life. The letter ended there. The room was silent, except for the sound of Diane breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with barely contained emotion. Then she exploded. This is ridiculous, Diane shouted, standing so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor with a harsh screech. I am his sister-in-law. I was married to his brother for 18 years. I deserve more than this. Brennan remained composed. Mrs. Morrison, the will is legally binding. Mr. Mitchell was of sound mind when he drafted it, and there are no grounds for contesting his wishes. Greg stepped in, his voice oily with false reasonableness. Surely there is some room for negotiation here. Allison is a young woman. She does not need all that money. Our family. He gestured to the boys. We have been going through some hard times. My business went under. We have 2 kids who need college funds. A fair distribution would be the Christian thing to do. I finally spoke. The Christian thing, I let the words hang in the air. You want to talk to me about fairness, about what is right? Greg shifted uncomfortably. Now, Allison, I know we have not had a chance to get to know each other, but we are family. No, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. We are not family. Family does not abandon a grieving teenager. Family does not disappear for 16 years and then show up with their hand out. Diane switched tactics immediately, her voice becoming soft and pleading. Allison, sweetheart, I know I made mistakes. I was young, I was overwhelmed, I was not thinking clearly. Losing your father broke something in me. I needed time to heal. Can you understand that I really looked at her for the first time since I walked into that room? I saw the lines around her eyes, the desperation beneath the makeup, the fear that her gamble was not paying off. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. You needed time to heal, I repeated. Is that what you told yourself? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you needed time to run off with your boyfriend. You were having an affair while Dad was dying. Did you think I did not know I found your messages? I saw everything. The color drained from Diane's face. The boys looked at her with confusion, clearly hearing something they had never been told. Greg's expression hardened. That is ancient history, he said. What matters now is the future. We are asking for $10 million, half of what you are inheriting. That is more than fair. You are threatening to sue me, I said. Your lawyer sent a letter claiming undue influence, saying I manipulated Harold into changing his will. I have a copy right here if you would like to discuss it. Greg's eyes flickered. That was a negotiating tactic. We do not actually want to go to court. Good, I said. Because if we go to court, I will bury you. I have documentation of every interaction Harold had with you over the past 10 years, including the email Diane sent 3 years ago begging him for money to save your failing business. He said no, and he told me then that he never wanted to hear from either of you again. Diane looked stricken. How do you know about that? Because Harold told me everything I said. He warned me this might happen. He knew you would come crawling back when there was money involved, and he prepared me for exactly this conversation. Brennan interjected. I can confirm that Mr. Mitchell left extensive documentation regarding his relationship with Mrs. Morrison. Any legal challenge would face significant obstacles, and frankly, given the evidence available, it would likely result in countersuits for harassment and attempted fraud. Greg slumped back in his chair, defeated. The boys were staring at their mother like they were seeing a stranger. Diane was trembling, her perfectly constructed facade crumbling. This is not fair, she whispered. I am your mother. I stood up, gathering my things. You gave birth to me. That is all you did. You were never a mother. Harold was more of a parent in 2 years than you were in 16. And you do not get to show up now 16 years too late and claim something you never earned. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. You will receive the $50,000 that Harold specified, not a penny more. If you attempt to contact me again, if you file any legal challenges, if you so much as mention my name in public, I will use every resource at my disposal to make your lives very difficult. Do we understand each other? Nobody answered. I took their silence as agreement. As I opened the door, one of the boys spoke up. His voice was uncertain, almost apologetic. We did not know about you. She never told us she had another daughter. I looked at him, this teenage boy who was technically my half-brother, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. That is not your fault, I said, but it tells you everything you need to know about the kind of person she is. I walked out of that conference room with my head held high. Behind me, I heard Diane start to cry, but I did not look back. I had spent too many years looking back. It was time to move forward. The months after that confrontation were not easy. I would be lying if I said I felt triumphant or at peace. The truth is, seeing my mother again stirred up feelings I thought I had buried long ago. The abandoned teenager inside me still wanted answers, still wanted to know why. Why was I not enough? Why did she choose to leave? I went back to therapy, something I had stopped doing after college. My new therapist, Dr. Samuel Ellis, helped me process everything. He said that confronting Diane was an important step, but it was not the end of my healing journey. It was just one chapter closing, so another could begin. Work became my anchor. I stepped into the CEO role at TechShield, fulfilling Harold's final wish. The first few months were overwhelming. The board had questions, the employees had concerns, the media wanted interviews. Some people doubted whether a 32-year-old woman could run a company Harold had spent decades building. I proved them wrong. I threw myself into the work the same way I had thrown myself into studies at MIT, with total commitment and relentless determination. I met with every department head, learned every aspect of the business, made decisions that were sometimes unpopular, but always sound. By the end of the first year, TechShield's revenue had grown by 18%, and even the skeptics had to admit I knew what I was doing. But I also learned something important during that time. Work could not be everything. Harold had taught me that in his final years, when he realized he had spent too much of his life in the office and not enough with the people he loved. I did not want to make the same mistake. I started building a life outside of TechShield. I reconnected with friends from college who had drifted away during my years of intense work. I joined a book club, started running along the lakefront, adopted a rescue dog named Cooper, who became my constant companion. Small things, but they added up to something bigger. A life that was full and balanced. And mine. 6 months after the will reading, I got a message on social media from Marcus, one of the twin boys. He said he was sorry for what happened at the lawyer's office. He said he had done some research and learned more about what his mother had done. He said he wanted to know his sister, if I was willing. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me wanted to say yes to give these kids a chance that was not their fault to lose. But another part of me knew I was not ready. The wound was still too fresh, and I could not separate them from their mother in my mind. Not yet. I finally wrote back and said, I am not ready right now, but maybe someday. Thank you for reaching out. Give yourself time to figure out who you are. That is what I had to do. He responded with just 2 words. I understand. I kept tabs on Diane from a distance, not because I cared about her, but because I needed to know she was not planning anything else. The news was predictable in its sadness. She and Greg divorced about 8 months after the will reading. Apparently, he blamed her for the failure of their scheme. The irony was not lost on me. She had left my father for Greg, and now Greg was leaving her. What goes around, as they say. The Kui Hawk Bong I established in Harold's name became one of my greatest sources of pride. The Harold Mitchell Technology Scholarship provided full funding for underprivileged students studying computer science with priority, given to those who had experienced family hardship or abandonment. In the first year alone, we funded 27 students. Watching them succeed, watching them overcome obstacles that would have crushed most people, reminded me of my own journey. Harold's legacy was living on. I met James at a tech conference in Boston about a year after Harold passed. He was an engineer at a cybersecurity firm we were partnering with, soft-spoken and thoughtful with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. We talked for 3 hours at the networking reception, missing most of the event. He asked for my number before I left, and I surprised myself by giving it to him. Our relationship developed slowly. I was cautious, still guarded from everything I had been through. But James was patient. He did not push, did not demand, did not make me feel like I needed to be anyone other than who I was. On our 6th date, I told him the whole story. My father, my mother, Harold, the will, everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he simply said thank you for trusting me with that. I knew then that he was different. I visit Harold's grave every Sunday. It is in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city, under a beautiful oak tree that reminds me of the one in the front yard of my childhood home. I bring flowers and a cup of his favorite coffee black with 2 sugars, and I talk to him about everything: the company, my life, the small victories and occasional setbacks. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I laugh, but I always leave feeling closer to him even though he is gone. The other day, I was sitting in my office, the office that used to be Harold's, looking out at the Chicago skyline. I thought about that 16-year-old girl sitting alone in an empty house in Iowa, reading her mother's note, feeling like the world had ended. I wanted to reach back through time and hold her. I wanted to tell her it is going to be okay. Not right away, not easily, but you are going to make it. You are going to find people who love you. You are going to build something beautiful. And I realized that is exactly what Harold did. He reached into my darkest moment and pulled me toward the light. He did not fix everything. He could not undo the damage my mother caused or bring my father back. But he showed up. He stayed. He loved me without conditions or expectations. And that made all the difference. So here is what I have learned after everything. Family is not about blood. It is about choice. It is about the people who show up when things fall apart, who stay when it would be easier to leave, who love you not because they have to, but because they want to. My mother shared my DNA, but she was never my family. Harold was my family. The friends who supported me, the colleagues who believed in me, James, who loves me for exactly who I am. They are my family. And to anyone watching this who has been abandoned or betrayed by the people who were supposed to love them, I want you to know something. Their leaving says everything about them, and nothing about you. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of loyalty. And someday you will find the people who see that. Do not give up. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to confront someone who hurt you deeply? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story below, because I believe we heal by connecting with each other. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, so you do not miss the next story, thank you for spending this time with me today. May you find the peace and the family you deserve